In the beginning, God created one, and then there were two, and then three, and then four, and then we were back down to three again, and then four. And over time, creation became more populated, but they were divided. They weren't together, they were scattered. Then there was the flood, and there were losses, and there were gains. But still, God's people seemed to be scattered and disjointed. There was zero sense of unity among God's people. Up to the point we now find ourselves in the story of the Israelite people. It has mostly been a story of individuals. Adam and then Eve, Noah and his family, Abraham and Sarah, and then Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. And then in the midst of this whole cast of characters, we are given Moses. Up to now, the story of God's people, we have been given that series of individuals, men and women and children, whose lives the great storytellers of sacred texts have given to us as a means of introducing us to God, introducing who God is to us, and informing us as to who we are in relationship to the divine. But now a shift has taken place, and the focus has become less about an individual person and more about the collective. The story is now about the whole, a body, a congregation of people. The name that was given to Jacob by God has now been transformed in both meaning and in purpose. From the one to the many. From an individual to a whole nation of people. And with that shift, our attention and our focus within the story broadens. And a relationship begins to take shape as it becomes more abundantly clear of God's care and concern for God's people, especially those who have been oppressed or who are held within captivity. Tell the whole congregation of Israel, God says to Moses and Aaron, that a new day, a new month, a new year is to begin. And with that new beginning comes a new ritual. Now, ritual has long played an important role within the life of congregation and community. Ritual is what binds us together. It binds us together with one another, and it binds us together with God in moments of sacred fellowship and communion. Every community has its own rituals. Those prescribed solemn ceremonies whose intent is to capture the sacred nature of God and unite a community in a common experience. For years here at St. Peter's, the Lord's Supper drama did just that. Its value was found not just in a meaningful act of worship during the Lenten season, but in the way that it was passed down from generation to generation to generation for years. Remember when the conversations would begin? And those conversations, or that phrase, was then followed by recollections and stories of what happened from one year to the next. That's ritual. That is what binds and holds a community together. Rituals can become an essential part of the fabric of any community, especially a faith community. They are a part of our whole story of who we are. And when observed correctly and faithfully, they serve an essential need of ensuring focus and attention and mission and identity, again, from generation to generation. Thus saith the Lord to Aaron and Moses, this day shall be a day of remembrance, a day of remembrance for you. You're going to celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations, you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance. In other words, it's something that you're never, ever, ever going to forget. Celebrate it often and pass it down like it's the most cherished piece of inheritance you could possibly have, you could possibly own. Pass it down to your children. Pass it down to your children's children, to their children. It shall be a never-ceasing decree, God says. These are very specific instructions that are given. The age of the lamb, the amount to be shared per family, how it is to be prepared, and even the speed with which you should eat it. The placement of the blood, of its blood upon the doorway of the house. Each step has a purpose, a means to an end. To remind us not just of the ritual, or not just the individual rather, but to remind the whole community of God, the significance of what God not only shall do now, but the importance of what God has done in the past and the importance of what God is going to do from now on into the future. That's the thing about ritual, especially ritual within sacred community. It does not, if it doesn't point us wholly and fully towards God, then it's not being done faithfully. And if it's not being done faithfully, then one must ask, should it be done at all? For the congregation of Israel, the instructions for Passover remind us of the hope that is meant to fill all of God's people. The anticipation that God is about to do something new, that God is about to do something powerful for the sake of liberating God's people from captivity and slavery. In that way, Passover is not just a singular act, but it is a continual act of liberation and freedom. Much in the same way for Christians that Christmas is not just one single act of incarnation, or in much in the same way that Easter is not just one single act of resurrection. Rather, it is an ongoing ritual. An ongoing ritual and custom of liberation that binds together a whole community of faith. Today, in order to mark the Passover, our Jewish brothers and sisters celebrate the Seder meal. Beginning just after sundown on the day before Passover, families and congregations gather to retell the story of liberation. And they read from the Haggadah, the storybook of the Passover that outlines the specific instructions for the meal, for which each item of that meal has a symbolic meaning. The word Haggadah literally means tell. And to read from the Haggadah is a fulfillment of the command that's found in Exodus 13 to tell each generation of people what has taken place. Rituals are born out of need. The need to remember the past, yes, but also the need to ensure a future. They are born out of custom. They are born out of tradition that connects God's people to the divine and connects God's people to one another. It's why we as Christian people come to worship. It's why we come together as community to recall who God is, to recall what God is, and to offer our praise and thanksgiving, to recall who we are in relationship to God. It's why we come together every week. It's why worship is so, so, so important as people of faith. Something that is not meant to be taken lightly. We come to this place each and every week out of need. We come to this place each and every week out of custom. Now, that need, well, sometimes that need, the need that we come out of is that need is our own need. We've had a bad week, or somehow life seems to be out of order, life seems to be out of place, and so we come and we worship as a means of recentering ourselves in relationship to God. But you see, that need that brings us here, that need is also God's need, not just our own. God needs us here. God wants us here, and God needs us here during this sacred time. Not to do business, not to gossip, not to put on a show, not to play church politics, but God needs us here to worship. God needs us here to be church, to be community, to be sacred community, to prepare ourselves to be Christian, to prepare ourselves to go into the world as disciples of Jesus Christ, to disciple other people. That is why we come here. To give of our whole selves to God. Because God has already given God's whole self to humanity. The need is to remember. But remembering is also a custom. As Christians, we love custom and we love ritual and we love tradition as much, if not more, than anybody else. But what I'm talking about is the tradition that points us to God, the tradition that highlights and emphasizes God primarily. Those are the only traditions worth honoring in the church, lest we fall victim to idolatry. We come out of custom because it was on the first day of the week that Mary went to the tomb and found it empty. We get up early at an inconvenient hour to be here because that's what Mary did. We sing, we pray, we hear a word. And yes, sometimes we have announcements and we bless students and we bless backpacks, which probably didn't happen in the early church, but still, we come and we do it because it's important. But we also come here to have our own Passover, our own liberation meal, our own meal of remembrance. A meal that has been passed down from generation to generation with specific symbols and specific instructions, all of which reminds us that God has liberated us, that God has freed us from all things which hold us captive in our life and in our faith. And so we come out of need and out of custom, not out of want, not out of habit, but out of need and out of custom. We come to this place where whether we are a single person or whether we are a whole community, we come. We need to come. Each of us needs to come so that we might be liberated. We need to come, as is our custom, to be unified in purpose and in identity. We need to come to bring a scattered people together into one ritual, one faith, one community. Back at the end of July, or end of June and into July, Josh and I were in Baltimore to attend the General Synod of the United Church of Christ. And on the night that we arrived, I got into a conversation with a Jewish lawyer from Brooklyn. So you had a Christian preacher from Georgia and a Jewish lawyer from New York. And yes, we were in a bar, because that's how all good jokes begin. And so there we were, sitting that Thursday night, and we were talking about religion, and we were talking about faith, and all of this, that, and the other. And because he's a lawyer, and I'm going to dare say more likely because he was from Brooklyn, he sat there all night in this weird accent interrogating me. asking me question after question after question about what I believe, about what I believed, and why I believe the way that I do. And finally he said to me, "Do you believe in the resurrection?" And I said yes. And before I could say anything else, he began to just interrogate me. Why? Why do you believe? Why do you believe in the resurrection? And he wouldn't even let me answer. Why do you believe in the resurrection? But why do you believe in the resurrection? And this went on and on and on. And finally, I was exhausted and I was frustrated. And finally, I just said, because I need to. Because I need to. I need to, in order for me to have any faith at all in God, I need to believe in the resurrection. And he got real quiet and he took a sip from his drink and he looked at me and he said, "Fair enough. Fair enough." That was enough for him. That was enough for him. Because of need. Because of need. And if that's good enough for a Jewish lawyer from Brooklyn, then it should be good enough for us as well.